Hi everyone. So I will be introducing our speakers today. We have the great pleasure of introducing Sarah Breen. Sarah is an associate professor of sport and exercise science at the Northern Michigan University in America. Sarah has been teaching biomechanics within a higher education setting for 12 years and teaches across undergraduate and graduate levels in face-to-face, hybrid, and fully online formats. And Sarah's talk today is entitled Active Learning in Online Classes, Getting in Sync with Your Students. So Sarah, we will hand this over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Yumna. So I am going to be primarily talking to you through my video sharing here. So if you haven't already, please change your view to speaker view so you can see my wonderful face nice and big on your screen. I will intermittently share my screen to show you some tools that I use as well. But yeah, speaker view as a Zoom function on the top right of your window is definitely the best way for you to follow along with what I'm doing today. The way that I am placing these text pieces on my video is through Prezi Video. And yeah, so if you want to try that out, I find it quite a nice way to hide the fact that I'm teaching from my bedroom and that there is a bed right behind me. Like Yumna indicated, I'm going to talk today about synchronous online instruction. And before I get into that, I just wanted to give you all a little bit of context, just my background. So as was mentioned, I've been teaching in higher ed for over 10 years, teaching biomechanics primarily. For 8 of those years, I've been the instructor of record or leading my own courses and modules. And I've done that across 3 different countries. So I'm Irish, I did my PhD and did my teaching assistant kind of teaching development work in Ireland. Then my first full-time role as a professor was in the US. I moved back to the UK and worked there for 4 years, and now I'm back across the Atlantic again and working in the US. So I've taught in 3 different countries, very, very different academic settings, different class sizes, and lots of different teaching environments. But the thing I guess that remains constant for me is the core pieces of my teaching philosophy. And what students can expect when they come to my classes is to be part of a community, that community being them and their peers and me as a part of that. And I think that's really important to facilitate learning in my classroom, and also to encourage active learning. And those things are especially challenging in an online setting, whether that's a planned online setting or an emergency online setting that most of us had to adapt to in the spring or winter of this year. I have had to do that a few times in my career due to different challenges, and yeah, it's always been something that I've leaned heavily on technology to kind of help me get through that and keep my core kind of principles alive and kicking as we go through. So I'm going to share with you some active learning strategies that I use in my online teaching that I find really effective. I am not going to tell you everything you can do, but I'm going to share with you what works for me and my students, and hopefully you will all find that useful. Like I mentioned, I'm going to focus on synchronous instruction. Philippe is going to talk later about asynchronous methods. And from the outset, I'd like to kind of say that I don't think fully synchronous is the best way to lead a course. I think a combination of synchronous and asynchronous gives our students the flexibility they need, especially in a time like now when we're dealing with pandemic and so many other kind of constraints for our students. So I am going to talk about 3 main strategies that I find work really well in my online classes. Currently at Northern, we are back in semester. I've just finished my 2nd week of teaching in our fall semester, and we are operating as a face-to-face campus, but we have modified on-campus classes most frequently delivered, which means most of my students can't fit in my classroom socially distanced, so I need to allow at least half of them to join via Zoom or join remotely. So I use a lot of these techniques to allow the students who are joining remotely in a synchronous fashion to engage in the learning content and feel like they're part of my classroom. These will work as well if you're working fully synchronously and you don't have any students sitting in front of you. So the first one is Think, Pair, Share. It's an activity, of course, you can use in a traditional classroom, but I've figured out a few ways to get it to work nicely in an online environment. Essentially, the elements of Think, Pair, Share is I prompt my students with a question. They have to think about it, then they have to talk to their peers about that and report back or share their ideas or their answers with me and with the rest of the class. So the ways that I've found that works nicely in an online environment is using Zoom breakout rooms. So essentially there's a function in Zoom if you are a host to allocate your students out into their own separate Zoom spaces. This is really nice for students who are a little bit shy and don't like speaking in front of the entire class group. It gives them a smaller, more comfortable space to talk about different things. Or whatever I prompt them on. It also helps me establish that community. I keep those groups consistent. They get to know the faces and the names of the students they're working with, and it helps alleviate some of that isolation that Helen talked about just a few seconds ago. In those breakout rooms, I typically leave them on their own. I've tried going in and joining the conversations, but I usually feel like I just interrupt what they're talking about and get in the way. So I use different collaborative tools to allow them to bring their ideas together and for me to kind of monitor at a distance. One tool that's been really useful for that has been Google Documents or Google Docs. So they'll have a Google Doc that they're typing their ideas into, and I can look at that from my safe, like at home Zoom space, and I can see what they're doing. And when everyone comes back into the main Zoom space, I can share those ideas and ask specific questions of each group. So Think, Pair, Share has been effective in my physical classroom, and I've been able to adapt that online using that Zoom breakout room function. Second thing I do a lot in my traditional face-to-face classroom that I've tried to now bring into my online space is asking lots of questions. I don't really let my students just sit there and listen all the time. I ask them lots of questions. I try to avoid yes/no questions, and I get them thinking and answering and actively participating in my classes. And I've had to come up with ways that I can allow my online students to engage in that process. One way, if you want to stay in the safe Zoom space, if you don't want to bring in lots of other tools, there is a polling function in Zoom. If you are, again, the host of the meeting, you can set up some polls ahead of time that you can ask your students questions and they can respond and you can share the results. Another one that I actually use more commonly because it integrates into my PowerPoint slides is a tool called Poll Everywhere. And I'm going to share my screen with you all briefly to show you that and to give you the opportunity to, I guess, see how that works and to actually respond to a Poll Everywhere question. So this is a service that I don't pay for. I'm not an advocate or a sponsor of Poll Everywhere, but I find it really useful in my classrooms. And the free version is perfect for me. It works internationally, so it can work in various countries. Obviously, internet access will be required to have the students actively engage with those questions. So on your screen right now, you should see a Poll Everywhere question. On the top of your screen, you will see a website link that you can go to respond to the poll. So essentially what my students would do is, if they're in class or at home, they're usually on their mobile device, on their mobile phone, they will go to this address and they will have the question visible on their screen and they will just select an option. So all of you that are here right now, if you want to try it out, you can go to the link that you'll see on the top of my screen. So pollev.com/Sarah Breen 543. So what I'm sharing with you now on my screen is just the question. And what I'm going to see on the bottom right of my screen, if I have enough of you responding, is that result number is going to go up. So right now I've had 2 people respond to this question. So just a simple question: how often do you prompt your students with a question in class? So I'll typically wait until I have enough respondents from my class to be able to talk about something of substance or substantial, and then I'll share the results with my students. So right now, out of 36 of you, I have 6 responses. So we're getting there. We're down to 5. Someone took it off. Oh, they put it back in. We're up to 6. Okay. So generally, I'm not going to wait around too long to get all of you to respond. But what we will see is we will be able to share then the results of that poll with the students. What's nice about this is I can have one of these be a correct answer if this is a multiple choice kind of knowledge test question, and I can just see what the kind of typical responses are across the classroom. If I go into this before everyone has responded, these will change, and you can see that they're updating as we're going here. So majority of people here ask questions every 15 minutes, some a little less time, some a little more time. And again, there's no right answer here. Everyone can do it at their own interval preference. The literature points to 15 minutes being a good interval to keep students engaged with different types of activities. Okay, so back to me, what I'm going to talk about next is another way in which I engage my students in active learning, and that is through brainstorming. So I can ask them to brainstorm in my entire class group space, or in their small breakout room space. So again, it can be a part of the think, pair, share activity, or it can be something that I want to prompt them about in class, check their knowledge on, things like that as well. So I'm going to jump back and actually show you what word cloud looks like in Poll Everywhere. I'm not going to get you guys to engage in this one just out of the interest of time. So Helen can not be mad at me when I go over time. And I'm going to show you what a word cloud response would look like. So it works in the same way. I have a Poll Everywhere add-in in my PowerPoint software that allows me to insert a slide into my presentation that's interactive, just like you all would have seen for the last example. This one here is just showing an example of this question: how do you use Poll Everywhere? And you can see that people use it for lots of different functions in their classes, maybe asking questions, getting feedback, marking attendance, anything like that. There's lots of different functions for Poll Everywhere. But what we're looking at here is a word cloud function. And it's a great way to like check understanding, have a brainstorming process. Students can respond multiple times, and the words that are the biggest are the ones that have had the most responses. Another neat example that I found, oh, my screen sharing has stopped. Of course, there had to be a technical difficulty. It wouldn't be a proper Zoom session if I didn't have an issue, right? So let's go back in here and do that again. Another neat one that I found, let's jump to that quickly, is this guy. So you can actually, if they're responding on their phone, they can use emojis to respond. And again, the most common emoji will appear the biggest. And that's maybe a neat way to get students to engage in that as well. Okay, so I'm done sharing my screen, so you can just look at me from now on. Oh, I'm not done sharing my screen. I did want to show you one more thing. So another neat way to get our students to brainstorm, we found really nice in our classes, is the whiteboard function, and it's a Zoom function. So when you go to share your screen, you have the option of selecting a whiteboard instead of selecting your actual screen to share. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. What you'll probably see right now is just a white screen, but what I have the function to do is to share with you how awful I am at drawing on a whiteboard when it's not a real whiteboard. So this is collaborative. So if you have a breakout room, students can all write on the whiteboard. They can draw, or they can type. They can use stamps if they really like what someone has said. They can use different stamps on there. They can also point to different things, and that's labeled with their name. So this is a nice tool to kind of engage in that brainstorming process across students. Another tool I found really nice for brainstorming and drawing is a tool called Nearpod. And I didn't have time to talk about it today, but if you've time and interest, I'd encourage you to look into that a little bit more. Okay, so what I'm going to finish with is kind of, I guess, interestingly linked with what Helen opened with, and the concept of accessibility of our online teaching. Even here at Northern Michigan University, where all of our students get a laptop and we have our own LTE network for our kind of the community that we teach in Marquette, we still have students who have difficulty with internet access. And I wanted to share some things that I found really effective to support those students. So typically one thing that I will do is I'll always record my Zoom calls and I'll make them available as a downloadable video on Google Drive. So that means that the students can go to a place where they have good internet, like maybe a local library. They can download the video there and then take it home and watch it where they don't have to worry about internet access or video buffering. The other thing that I do for those students is I give them a worksheet to do while they're watching their video or they're engaging in lecture. So sometimes they can't join a traditional Zoom meeting with video and sound. They might join using their phone. And if that's the case, they won't have the poll everywhere options or those interactions. So I make a worksheet available for them that they can fill in, maybe fill in the blanks. They have the questions there that I might put on the poll. So it allows them to engage and follow along with the lecture in a similar way to those who are able to join effectively online. Final thing is thinking about students who have special needs, and each of us in our own classes and courses will know what the needs of our students are. In my classes, I have students with varying requirements. Maybe they have different learning disabilities, visual or hearing impairments, and ways that I try and support those students, again, is providing a recording. And also a thing I found useful is placing that recording also on YouTube. YouTube has a really nice free subtitling service for any videos that you upload. Those subtitles can be in any language. So it is a nice way for students who prefer to read when they're watching or learning, or for those who might have hearing impairments to follow along with lectures. And that's been a nice way that I've found to kind of support those students with those different accessibility needs. And I think my time is up. It's been great to share what's worked for me with you all, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Zeta. It's so interesting. So we've got a couple of questions. One from Bel Sacco asking, does Mentimeter work in the same way as polling everywhere?
Could you repeat that? Does what work in the same way?
Does Mentimeter work?
I haven't used that, so I'm not sure. Poll Everywhere works as an add-in, like I said, in PowerPoint. They just go to a website that comes up on their phone. So I guess if that's the same as the other one, then maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah. And then Helen's asked, you talked about using Google Docs as a collaborative tool. Are you getting students to work in Docs during their breakout sessions?
Yeah, so I'll usually give each group their own Google Doc that they can like write in, type in, things like that, and then I can monitor that as they're going. So I'll usually share the link with them ahead of time, and they'll work on that in that breakout room. Yeah.
Great. And then Mark Kramer has asked, how do you manage everything between face-to-face and online teaching when some students opt not to come to class but would rather work online?
Yeah, we have that as a kind of a recurring issue, or something that's starting to happen now, where we're facilitating some of our students joining online. And my philosophy is I would prefer them to join online and learn something as opposed to do nothing. So I guess, I'm kind of a caring kind of person who maybe cares too much about my students. So I'll usually just be quite flexible and give them the opportunity to join online if I think that's best for them. Like with everything going on in the world right now, I think flexibility and understanding for our students is pretty important. So I usually just give them the benefit of the doubt, allow them to join online and try and make that experience as kind of similar as possible to what my face-to-face students have.
Yeah, I agree with you. The flexibility is key. Then we've got one last question before we move on to the next speaker from Kat Daniels. Kat's asked, do you have any tips for how to manage synchronous classes, which would include labs, where some students are present in person and some are online? How do you make both groups feel part of a session, and how do you manage the brainstorming and interactive discussions?
Yeah, so what I've done so far is I group the online students together in their own group, and then my face-to-face students work in a group as well. I find it really challenging to have people on Zoom and face-to-face at the same time. It takes an extremely large amount of brain power. But what I can't monitor the chat, for instance, while I'm teaching in person as well. So what I ask of my online students is that they unmute and speak if they have a question, because my computer is connected to the room audio. So the other thing I do is all of my students who are in my face-to-face classroom are on Zoom as well. They're muted and their audio on their computer is muted. So what that means, if they ask a question or they speak, the students online can hear them better, because otherwise I'm relying on my microphone at the top of the room to have everyone hear, which usually doesn't work very well.
That's a good idea. Okay, I'm going to take one last one because we have to move on. Johan van Heerdens asked, assessments and honesty are an issue. How do you deal with this?
Yeah, so if we have our students fully remotely online, we are giving them exams and we don't know for sure if they're using the book or not. The way I guess do it is I make my exams, like if they did have the book, or we're looking at their notes, then it would still be a challenge. So that's one way. The other thing that I do to avoid them working with their friend is if I have questions or quiz or an exam on Educat, well, that's our Moodle system, I rotate the questions. So they're coming from a pool of questions, so they won't all have the same question, rotate the answers. Yeah, it's a trust system. Obviously, there's lockdown browsers that we can use to limit the ability of them using other sources. But my, I guess, outlook is, likelihood is that they're probably going to look at their notes. So make the exam in a way that it's testing other things besides their ability to just remember that one thing that they've written in their notes or it's in the book.